Good morning to everybody. We are going to start our seminar on interdisciplinary thinking. This was a seminar promoted by the College F3, which is interested in this particular theme because we are starting many activities that somehow call for an interdisciplinary thinking and approach to be successful. And we also, many of us at least, are interested in the theme itself because of the research they carry out that in which they learn that they need to move into this direction. So first, this is the theme. It's a theme of the highest interest for the college. One of the activities we are starting, probably will start next year, is the PhD program related to, which is inherently interdisciplinary in goals, but I think we are creating tools to work interdisciplinarily by creating platforms, electronic tools, and teaching methods and pedagogic methods. But I think we need to do more. We need to go more in depth into the questions and issues related with difficulties and that is limitations and also the potential of interdisciplinary approach. And this is why we first thought about this conference or this seminar, in which the format is very simple. I'm starting to present our speakers. The Uskali Maki at my left is professor at the Academy of Finland and is professor of practical philosophy at University of Helsinki. It's also director of the Academy of Finland Center of Excellence in the Philosophy of the Social Sciences. He worked in many areas and has many works in such areas like philosophy of science, philosophy of social sciences, philosophy of economics, economic methodology, models, explanation, scientific realism, interdisciplinarity, social studies of science, social ontology, and rhetoric of inquiry. And then Professor Olga Pombo from the University of Lisbon, from the Faculty of Sciences of the University of Lisbon, and she is coordinator of the Center for Philosophy of Science at this university. This is a research center funded by the Portuguese FCT that works on these areas since 2003. And she's program director of the International Doctorate Program on Philosophy of Science, Technology, Art and Science. She's also member of the Scientific Council of the Réseau National des Maisons des Sciences de l'Homme, and her main research areas are philosophy of science, modern philosophy, theory of image, science and art, and philosophy of education. And I am José Lima Santos. I know many of you. I work at this university in the School of Agriculture, Instituto Superior de Agronomia. And first I start by giving the thanks of the college to both of you to having accepted participating in this event, which will be very useful for us, as I said, because we are going to try to go more in depth into these problems and potential of interdisciplinarity. And we will basically I will basically introduce our two colleagues because they have interdisciplinary as their subject of study. So both Maki and Olga Pombo, they work with this theme as their subject of study. So they approach interdisciplinarity as their subject. And myself, probably as many of you, we will live in a research world, which is surrounded by interdisciplinarity in ways we sometimes recognize and others don't. And I will mostly talk from that perspective of someone who is surrounded by interdisciplinarity and started to think about it because it is worthwhile. It is something that requires some thinking in addition to practice. And so we'll start first with the talk given by Professor Uskali Maki, and then we'll pass to Professor Olga Pombo, and I will be the last one because I will mostly talking from practice, I will probably make it easier for you to come into the debate in the second part of the seminar. So please, Uskali, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's just lovely to be here. I didn't quite know what to expect, what kind of audience to expect, what kind of space to expect, and so forth. So I'm not sure I'm prepared for exactly this kind of occasion, but I'll do my best. So I've been asked to give some opening remarks from my particular, if you wish, disciplinary point of view, also my specific experience with dealing with interdisciplinarity. I've been an interdisciplinary animal throughout my academic life. Have quite some experience in organizing interdisciplinary activities, and now that I'm doing philosophy of science research that focuses on issues and phenomena of interdisciplinarity, I feel like learning so much more about all those troubles and hopes and whatever there have been in the course of these experiences in trying to enhance, promote interdisciplinary activities. None of those experiences have been easy. All of them have been very enjoyable. It's interdisciplinarity usually is hard, it's difficult, but the rewards are very high. So I'll say a few things about a couple of topics. First, about the role of philosophy of science in the study of interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity in general. And then I'll talk something about why exactly there is so much hassle around interdisciplinarity right now, rather than, say, half a century ago. There's a lot of talk about it. Yeah, we talk about it once again. Everybody talks about it, and in all sorts of situations and constellations of people. There are all sorts of research funding schemes that are designed so as to promote, enhance, and support interdisciplinarity. There are calls for the research projects that would have interdisciplinary nature, and then in response to these calls, there are proposals that are supposed to have an interdisciplinary nature, and so forth. And on both sides, there's a lot of rhetoric of interdisciplinarity. These calls, if you read them with care, are filled with often unsubstantiated hopes of something that the funding agencies want. And of course, in the research proposals, there's a lot of persuasion as to how wonderfully interdisciplinary this or that research proposal is going to be. So please fund it, and so forth. Now, much of this talk about interdisciplinarity is governed by, indeed, administration or the administrative perspectives and science policy perspectives. And I'm looking at this talk about interdisciplinarity from a philosophy of science point of view. I see a lot of unclarities, obscurities, jargon that seems unfounded or not clear at all what it might be taken to mean. Rather shallow understanding of what interdisciplinarity is or what can be demanded of interdisciplinarity and so forth. So this admin and policy talk about interdisciplinarity often are fairly shallow. It misses the depths and nuances of interdisciplinarity. And it's right here that the philosophy of science is called for, to fill in these gaps, to remedy these deficiencies in this admin and policy talk about interdisciplinarity. There's also this interesting thing going on here regarding the kind of information and research and evidence that is supposedly being employed and used in science policy that promotes interdisciplinarity. Nowadays we have this fashionable idea of doing evidence-based or research-based policies here and there. And of course science policy should also be research-based. But then you think of what kind of research actually serves as an input to science policy today, especially science policy intending to promote interdisciplinarity. It's mainly scientometrics, bibliometrics and all that. You know, this quantitative data collected, and you have these nice graphs and columns and so forth, and then the policymakers take that as sufficient data or sufficient research for their purposes. But in here they obviously will miss a lot of the realities of interdisciplinarity, all the various social aspects of it, the cognitive aspects of it, and all that, all the rest of it. And it's right here that you know, a philosophical perspective might be of some help in filling in the gaps that there are in this research that goes to science policy dealing with interdisciplinarity. The information that science policy typically uses coming from scientometrical research is often all too aggregative, all too generalized, and all too dismissive of significant details. And this is, again, to advertise my own disciplinary perspective, where there is a lot of work to be done. So what philosophy, I mean, the image of philosophy, everybody has some image of philosophy. There are these philosophers who live in their closed towers, have their own jargon, are only able to talk to one another, and so forth. That's not my kind of philosophy. I'm always trying to connect with other disciplinarians, other fields, and so forth. And I take my task as one of community service, as it were. Whenever there is a need for clarity on details, language, concepts, and so forth, I might want to try offer some help in making it more clear, so as to reduce the friction or reduce the possibility of misunderstanding that there is in scientific practice. So this attention to small detail, but very relevant detail, is one thing that a philosopher of my kind would try to be of some help. And the other side of the coin is that a philosopher of this kind also tries to develop the big picture, vision of the whole thing. So science as a whole, science in society, and so forth, rather than just pay attention to small slices of that big picture. So it's a combined activity that, on the one hand, and this is what we just talked at the coffee with Wanda, on the one hand uses a microscope for the small detail, and then a big telescope for the big thing, and that might neither of these actually are in use by special scientists who try to combine their expertise in interdisciplinary endeavors. And it's right here that philosophy of the right kind might be of help. All right, so much for that. I could say much more, of course, about specifics, but I'll then say a few things about the very notion of interdisciplinarity and the reasons for its current popularity. First, about the latter, why on earth does everybody talk about it? Why on earth is everybody encouraged to do it, and so forth? I can see two major reasons, and of course there is more, and this is indeed a picture of the current situation, and if we only focus on the current situation, then we might lose sight of the bigger picture again, the full history of interdisciplinarity, that is as long as disciplinarity. As long as there have been disciplines, there has been interdisciplinarity. And that's often missed if you only look at the current situation where certain kinds of interdisciplinarity are favored and supported and promoted and so forth. But so these two major reasons for which interdisciplinarity is so popular today, first of all, and the most important in my judgment would be that there is science kind of has a resource problem nowadays. Okay, scientific communities, universities, etc., they chronically struggle with the resources in their use. And then we have the external world, the rest of society, the governments and what have you. And then the resources are supposed to come from those directions, the government and the rest of society, whatever we include in that rest of society. And now, in order, and this is what has happened, in order to receive those resources for science from elsewhere, science needs to please or serve the rest of society. I mean, to prove its usefulness, its relevance, and things of that kind. So there is this external practical pressure that is forcing science to go more interdisciplinarity. There is the expectation that by going interdisciplinary, science will be more societally, practically relevant and useful, and thereby sort of earn the resources that the rest of society is giving over to the use of science. And of course, then there is this notion that's linked with this, that science should tackle and provide solutions to problems, complex, practical, societal problems out there. And that kind of activity, so in order to be successful, must be interdisciplinary. So this is roughly the way that things go regarding this first reason for the popularity of interdisciplinarity. And this can be then packaged with a number of other things that we are so familiar with in contemporary academic life. These expectations of accountability. I mean, we are supposed to be accountable for our activities. We are expected to use the resources efficiently, to produce output, to deliver, as this new jargon suggests. And in order for us to be efficient in delivering what is expected from us regarding these practical problems out there, our performance needs to be measured. And then we have this new audit culture, measuring our performance in so many different ways all the time, to the smallest detail, and so forth. And we are forced to compete with one another. We are ranked. Universities are ranked. Disciplines are ranked. There are international rankings. Even individuals may be ranked. I mean, it varies from country to country, and so forth. So these things often go together, and it's very important to try to disentangle some of their elements. I mean, it's okay, of course. I mean, nobody would have any problem with the idea that science should be used for addressing and solving these big contemporary problems that humankind is facing, etc. But there is more in this package, and then one might be a bit more critical about these other elements in this package. The other major reason for the current popularity of interdisciplinarity is a kind of internal to science, internal epistemic drive. And this is, of course, the good old-fashioned idea of trying to develop, to go for a unified picture of the world. And this is a response to the excessive specialization that we have witnessed in scientific work. I mean, there's an ongoing specialization into all ever smaller compartments of expertise, scientific expertise, and so forth. We are supposed, scientists know ever more about ever smaller bits and pieces of the world and those kinds of things. So there's a narrowing of competencies, and then in response to this development, there is a kind of felt need for a bigger picture to connect with other disciplinary neighbors, connect with other competencies and so forth, so as to develop bigger images of the world. How much should I use for? Have I already?
If you still need some time, you can.
Maybe I'll just say a couple of things regarding the very notion of interdisciplinarity and various typologies of it. It's right here. I mean, here we have a big concept, a very, very important and loaded concept of interdisciplinarity. And it has been defined, articulated, classified, etc., in the past several years by people other than philosophers. And then philosophy has only recently started looking more closely into this terminology, this vocabulary that is already being used and defined in so many different ways. And then, dissatisfactions arise and so forth. It's, I have difficulties with using this terminology and the current classifications simply because I see so many problems in it. And I think it would need to be completely redone and so start from fresh and try to provide new definitions, new classifications, etc. These two reasons that I just mentioned for current popularity, the external pressure and then the internal drive for epistemic unity and so forth, they both often suggest as key ideas behind the notion of interdisciplinarity, those of integration and collaboration. So different disciplinary contributions should be integrated with one another, and there should be collaboration between different disciplinarians. And then there is an idea of degree of integration. I mean, this appears in the policy talk, and they even provide measurements of the degree of integration. So they'd say, for instance, the number of citations across disciplinary boundaries, or the number of disciplinary parties in a research project and things like that. But these key notions, I think, give a very limited picture of what there is to interdisciplinarity. There is much more to interdisciplinarity. There is interdisciplinarity that involves no degree of integration at all, and there is a lot of interdisciplinarity that does not require any kind of collaboration and things like that. So even though these collaborative and integrative versions of interdisciplinarity are currently much emphasized, it's very important to keep in mind that there are other versions that do not need these two. Anyway, I think I have much more to say, but I'll leave it here.
So now we are going to listen Professor Olga Pombo's presentation. She will have a PowerPoint there, so he will present, and we can probably stay here because we can see there. Okay.
On. Já está? Já está agora? Pronto, então muito bom dia. Eu quero agradecer o convite Gosto muito de participar nesta sessão, por várias razões que tentarei explicar depois. Antes de mais, só gostava de fazer uma clarificação relativamente à minha apresentação. Eu estou reformada, reformei-me há muito pouco tempo, e por essa razão, aquelas funções todas que desempenhei e que efetivamente desempenhei, neste momento estou reformada, quer dizer, desempenhei no passado e não agora já no presente. Mas continuo a ser docente de um programa interdisciplinar em Filosofia da Ciência, Tecnologia, Arte e Sociedade, que eu própria fundei e que fui, de facto, coordenadora, mas já não sou, e continuo a ser membro do Centro de Filosofia das Ciências. E muito especialmente numa linha temática que tem por objetivo estudar a questão da interdisciplinaridade, da qual eu já há bastante tempo me venho ocupando. Mas eu hoje queria-vos falar, e trouxe aqui assim esta proposta, de 4 observações, para uma mesa redonda, 4 observações muito simples sobre a questão da interdisciplinaridade. E a primeira é o seguinte: quando se pensa na interdisciplinaridade, e isso é muito importante, toda a gente a faz, toda a gente a reclama, o professor Maqui acabou de dizer isso, todos os programas são interdisciplinares, todos os colóquios são interdisciplinares, todos os programas doutorais são interdisciplinares, todos os projetos são interdisciplinares, a FCT e todas as instâncias de financiamento exigem quase que as coisas sejam interdisciplinares, foi o que acabou de dizer o professor Maqui, e a minha questão é saber, mas porquê? Porquê? A que propósito? Não basta dizer que tudo é interdisciplinar, é preciso perceber a que propósito é que a palavra surge com esta força, com esta veemência, com esta insistência. E é um bocadinho isso que eu gostava de tentar perceber. É claro que é muito difícil e, como compreendem, numa exposição deste tipo, não posso senão deixar brevíssimos apontamentos sobre a questão. E um primeiro apontamento diz respeito ao seguinte: eu penso que a interdisciplinaridade está em linha com uma série de outros fenómenos que caracterizam a nossa cultura e a nossa civilização. As culturas e as civilizações transformam-se e a nossa está a sofrer uma enorme transformação. E penso que a interdisciplinaridade pertence a esse domínio. Eu pus aqui assim um quadro do Kandinsky. O Kandinsky foi um dos primeiros a perceber esse estilhaçar do mundo que nós herdámos do século XIX. Nós estamos num mundo, de alguma maneira, estilhaçado, de alguma maneira cindido numa quantidade de dimensões que depois nos cabe a nós articular e pensar. Os pintores foram um dos primeiros, este é um quadro do Pollock, ainda da primeira metade do século XX, os pintores foram os primeiros, os artistas, a pressentir este estilhaçamento. E quando muita gente olha para um quadro de pintura contemporânea e não encontra uma paisagem, pode perguntar, mas porquê é que não há uma paisagem? Porquê é que não há qualquer coisa de reconhecível? É porque exatamente o nosso mundo já não é o mundo da paisagem, é o mundo deste estilhaçamento, desta articulação múltipla, desta complexidade do qual a interdisciplinaridade é uma dimensão. E isto nota-se na pintura, como se nota na própria ideia de computador. A própria ideia de computador supõe o tal circuito integrado, a tal conjugação de forças e de relações que se estabelecem instantaneamente. Tem a ver com a internet. A internet que todos utilizamos é um instrumento, é um meio, é muito mais do que um instrumento, é um meio, é um caldo no qual nós vivemos. E reparem, em 1989 é também exatamente o ano da queda do Muro de Berlim. Portanto, não é por acaso, estas coisas não são por acaso. E cabe ao pensador perceber as articulações e as afinidades que há entre estas coisas. O fim do Muro de Berlim, sabem que foi um acontecimento emblemático do ponto de vista político e do ponto de vista civilizacional. Se quiserem, eu posso retirar daqui esta ideia de que, no fundo, o nosso mundo, o tal mundo do estilhaçamento, o tal mundo dos circuitos integrados, o tal mundo das articulações, é também um mundo que não gosta de fronteiras. É por isso que nós ficamos tão escandalizados quando ouvimos alguns que vão construir agora novas fronteiras. Nós não gostamos de fronteiras, não gostamos de muros. Se quisesse, eu podia até cheguei a pensar, chamar a esta minha pequena palestra, We are all Berliners, porque nós não gostamos de muros. E isso faz parte da nossa consciência de cidadãos finais do século XX e princípios do século XXI. E a interdisciplinaridade surge justamente, corresponde justamente a um mundo que é este, que se manifesta na pintura, que se manifesta no computador, que se manifesta na internet, que se manifesta em acontecimentos políticos, e eu estou simplesmente a dar umas pinceladas, porque poderia, como compreendem, aprofundar muito mais. A interdisciplinaridade corresponde ao estabelecimento de relações entre territórios não imediatamente contíguos, ao estabelecimento de pontes entre espaços que estão aparentemente afastados, ou à conexão de instâncias que estavam previamente separadas e ao estabelecimento de links insuspeitados. É neste universo que a interdisciplinaridade tem que ser entendida, neste universo cultural e neste universo civilizacional, ou seja, de uma transformação profunda do nosso mundo. Mas a interdisciplinaridade também corresponde, e neste universo, justamente, outra das características deste universo é uma estrutura disciplinar diferente e nova, que vai ter necessidade de surgir. Estávamos habituados ao velho esquema tradicional das 7 artes liberais, que estão aqui assim referidas, não é verdade? E sobre o qual se constituiu a universidade. A nossa universidade é herdeira desta estrutura do trivium e do quadrivium, das faculdades em que nós estamos divididos, a faculdade de letras, a faculdade de ciências, a faculdade de direito, a faculdade de economia. E esta estrutura de disciplinas e de quadrados, é curioso que nesta representação do trivium e do quadrivium, elas são quadrangulares. O universo era um universo, não era ainda um universo de relações, era um universo de estabelecimento de quadrados, de quadriculações. E é assim que a nossa universidade foi construída. Felizmente herdámos dos gregos esta estrutura, os medievais trabalharam, este seria um outro tópico que eu podia desenvolver imenso, mas que não farei, e é esta a estrutura que nós herdámos. Esta estrutura, por exemplo, das ciências, a matemática, a física, a química, a biologia, etc. Ora, esta estrutura deu origem às nossas universidades e, por exemplo, pode ser imageticamente representada, ou tem a ver, simbolicamente quase representada, com a estrutura de uma biblioteca. Como sabem, a biblioteca é o lugar onde estão, enfim, guardados aquilo a que o Popper chamava o terceiro mundo, ou seja, os conhecimentos que a humanidade foi construindo ao longo do tempo, e quando se vai a uma biblioteca, isto é a sala principal da Biblioteca do Congresso, quando se vai a uma grande biblioteca, o saber está dividido por secções. Se quiser ir para a história, vai para uma secção, se quiser ir para a filosofia, vai para outra, se quiser ir para a matemática, vai para outra. E estas capelinhas e esta divisão em compartimentos é a mesma divisão que corresponde à nossa estrutura universitária clássica. Ora, perante um mundo que já mudou, que já não é este, estamos num período justamente de transição. Também as universidades se estão a transformar, também as bibliotecas se estão a transformar. Todas as estruturas que foram criadas para corresponder a um saber de disciplinas, feito como com as artes liberais, umas sentadas ao lado das outras, como compreendem, separadas e sentadas ao lado das outras, este mundo está a ser transformado. E o que acontece é que a interdisciplinaridade corresponde a essa transformação estrutural. A interdisciplinaridade corresponde ao ultrapassar de barreiras entre disciplinas e à emergência de novos tipos de disciplinas. Nós já não temos, antes a física dividia-se em várias subdisciplinas. E cada uma das subdisciplinas eram subdisciplinas da física. Nós hoje temos, o que caracteriza a nossa configuração disciplinar, é a constituição de espaços disciplinares que são espaços de fronteira ou que são espaços de interrelação entre várias áreas. O vosso caso é um deles. A ciência, por exemplo, da ecologia, é um exemplo daquilo que eu chamei, num livro que escrevi sobre este assunto, as interciências. Ou seja, já não se trata até de juntar duas disciplinas próximas uma da outra, que não são bem próximas. Por exemplo, na bioquímica ou na biomatemática não são nada próximas, porque na estrutura clássica, a matemática ou a química correspondem a um grau, a um tipo de conhecimento que não tem nada a ver com o conhecimento da vida. E entre a matemática e a vida, do ponto de vista clássico, havia uma ruptura muito grande. Compreendem? Era uma das senhoras, uma das 7 artes liberais, estava sentada numa cadeira e a outra estava sentada na outra, lá muito longe. Ora, o que nós temos quando juntamos e fazemos uma biomatemática, ou fazemos uma bioquímica, ou uma biofísica, estamos já a produzir um efeito, digamos, de articulação disciplinar completamente novo, que não tem nada a ver com a estrutura clássica da organização do saber que nós herdamos do século XIX. A mesma coisa acontece com aquilo que eu chamo as interdisciplinas, que são a ligação entre ciências e áreas do campo industrial ou organizacional, como, por exemplo, a Operational Research, é um exemplo clássico, é uma das primeiras, ou as interciências, aquilo que eu chamo as configurações disciplinares múltiplas, em que a ecologia é um exemplo clássico. A primeira foi a cibernética, mas a partir daí não temos senão assistido à constituição de novas disciplinas que resultam da ligação de disciplinas que aparentemente não tinham nada a ver uma com a outra e que se juntam pela primeira vez de forma insuspeita. Este é o Wiener, maravilhoso autor, uma figura fantástica da história da estrutura disciplinar, criador da cibernética, que foi a primeira interdisciplina, do meu ponto de vista. E, por exemplo, pouco tempo depois, o Bertalanffy, que aliás pertenceu à Constituição, era amigo do Wiener e foi um dos principais elementos para a Constituição da cibernética, o Bertalanffy, num dos seus livros, apresenta esta organização das ciências. É muito interessante porque, se lembrarem das 7 artes liberais sentadas ao lado uma da outra, e se virem agora este quadro apresentado em 1956, pouco depois da criação da cibernética, a cibernética é da década de 40, mas está em pleno neste momento, compreendem que estamos perante uma forma de pensar o conhecimento e as relações entre as ciências que já é completamente outra. Já estamos ao nível da articulação múltipla e não da seriação e da distinção em quadrados separados. Por exemplo, as ciências cognitivas, tenho aqui assim um pequeno exemplo das ciências cognitivas, tem aqui uma articulação, é um exemplo de uma interdisciplina, de uma interciência, perdão, e aqui está o que são as ciências cognitivas. As ciências cognitivas são uma junção de filosofia, linguística, antropologia, neurociência, inteligência artificial, psicologia. Estas são as principais, porque se formos ver, há muitas outras disciplinas, matemática, computação, que entram naquilo que se chamam as ciências cognitivas. Este quadro é de 1985 e, se fôssemos ver um quadro das ciências cognitivas hoje, haveria um maior número de disciplinas dentro das ciências cognitivas, nomeadamente a computação, estaria lá de certeza. Portanto, este tipo de ciência não nasceu no século XVIII, nem podia ter nascido. No século XVIII, o que podia ter nascido era uma subdisciplina da física ou uma subdisciplina da biologia. Mas não podia, compreendem, por divisão dentro da própria biologia. Não podia ter nascido uma disciplina deste género, nem nasceu. Não é? Eu pus aqui, por exemplo, o exemplo das ciências da complexidade, num quadro que apresenta por épocas. É muito interessante. Ali na primeira coluna tem as ciências da complexidade nos anos 40, 50, justamente no momento em que estava a ser criada a cibernética, no momento em que esta nova organização disciplinar começa a dar os primeiros passos, e vejam depois pelas décadas fora, 60, 70, 90, como as disciplinas se vão complexificando no seu interior para dar conta de uma coisa que se chama as ciências da complexidade. Elas mesmas ciências complexas, elas mesmas constituídas por um conjunto de disciplinas com articulações múltiplas, elas que estudam os sistemas complexos e que eles também estão ligados a um conjunto de áreas e a um conjunto de problemas que aqui estão representados. Portanto, uma segunda dimensão. Uma terceira dimensão que eu gostava de assinalar é que a interdisciplinar corresponde a uma nova situação cognitiva. Não apenas disciplinar, mas cognitiva. Aliás, não faria sentido haver uma nova situação disciplinar se não houvesse uma nova situação cognitiva. Quer dizer, se o conhecimento humano, esse conhecimento que nós chamamos de ciência, que vai, ao longo dos séculos, se vai construindo, se esse conhecimento não estivesse num novo momento do seu desenvolvimento, da sua história e do seu desenvolvimento. E eu pus aqui o pavão como exemplo da complexidade, como exemplo de um tipo de fenómeno que a ciência ao qual a ciência durante muito tempo virou costas. A ciência moderna, a ciência que nós tivemos até ao princípio do século XX, foi uma ciência para a qual Descartes ofereceu uma metafísica e uma metodologia, e um regime metodológico. Eu também podia explorar isto longamente, explicar o que é que o Descartes fez e porquê é que fez e porquê é que ele foi importantíssimo para o desenvolvimento da ciência. Também não o vou fazer, só chamar a atenção para a questão metodológica, que é o seguinte: segundo Descartes, essa é uma regra de ouro, tem sido uma regra de ouro da nossa ciência, quando se tem um problema ou uma dificuldade, divide-se o problema em pequenas partes e estuda-se cada uma das partes de per si, na convicção de que mais tarde se juntam esses resultados e se obtém uma resposta satisfatória para a totalidade. E este regime foi aquele que organizou a nossa ciência e foi aquele que a nossa ciência seguiu durante muito tempo e felizmente que seguiu porque teve ótimos resultados. A ciência do princípio do século XX é uma ciência cheia de ótimos resultados e, portanto, não temos nada a obstar a isto. Só que, para fazer isso, para dividir a dificuldade em pequenas parcelas, era necessário partir do princípio que o todo era igual à soma das partes. Assim como era necessário partir do princípio que eu podia abandonar a concretude, abandonar os problemas tal como eles se colocam na vida diária e reportá-los a entidades abstratas. E essas sim podiam ser divididas em partes. Eu não estou a estudar a água que está à frente no copo d'água, eu estou a estudar o OH2. Esse sim pode ser matematizado. E o OH2 não é a água que está no meu copo d'água, são todas as águas possíveis e imaginárias. Portanto, a questão da metafísica é aqui muito importante, mas a questão da metodologia também é muito importante. Isto precisava de muito mais desenvolvimentos, mas só por alto penso que já dá. Ora, com base nesta ciência, que, como vos digo, deu resultados magníficos, a verdade é que se criou uma ciência extremamente disciplinar. Porque se eu tenho uma dificuldade e preciso de a dividir em bocados, então, se eu tiver uma disciplina, eu posso atribuir a um especialista um bocado e a outro especialista outro bocado. Portanto, a especialização é uma consequência desta metafísica e deste regime metodológico. E a especialização cresceu, foi um trabalho fantástico do indivíduo que sabe imenso sobre uma parcela cada vez menor da realidade, e por isso pode aprofundar, exatamente porque sabe muito, porque o seu campo se reduz, ele pode descer muito fundo, na expectativa de encontrar um conhecimento muito profundo de uma partícula que depois se une com outras para reconstituir o todo. Só que há todos que não são iguais à soma das partes, como sabem, não é? Os organismos, os sistemas complexos não são iguais à soma das partes. Mas aconteceu outra situação, é que essa especialização chegou a pontos absolutamente terríveis e que foram denunciados por muita gente. Eu pus aqui uma citação de um célebre estudioso do livro, o Milars Carlo, e ele trabalhava numa biblioteca e dizia: um químico que dominasse 30 línguas, se começasse no primeiro dia de janeiro a ler todas as publicações relativas à sua especialidade, durante 40 horas por semana, no fim, ao nível, portanto, à rácio de 4 artigos por hora, que é já uma loucura, no dia 31 de dezembro, não teria lido mais do que a 10ª parte do material publicado durante esse ano. Esta observação é de 1971. Se nós a atualizarmos para hoje, percebemos que Milars Carlo tinha toda a razão, todos nós sentimos isso, e mais, sentimos que não vamos conseguir cumprir esse destino de especialização tão funda. Além disso, os problemas que nós queremos tratar já são outros e não são suscetíveis desse esquadrilhamento, dessa divisão. Portanto, daqui resulta a capacidade de enfrentar novos tipos de problemas. E são esses novos tipos de problemas. E é essa incapacidade de nos inscrevermos num regime disciplinar segmentado e analítico, se quiserem, e a presença destes problemas urgentes, globais, importantíssimos, dos quais muitas vezes o nosso futuro depende, são estas circunstâncias todas que estão na origem deste novo regime, que é o regime interdisciplinar. Ou seja, nós temos hoje uma nova metafísica, que eu poderia explicar, mas que tem sobretudo a ver com a questão da complexidade. Tem sobretudo a ver com a questão de que o todo não é só uma das partes. De que nós já não queremos isolar uma variável. Não é? De antes fazia-se um esforço para isolar uma variável. Mantinha-se a temperatura constante, mantinha-se a pressão constante, mantinha-se não sei o quê constante, para estudar, sei lá, a velocidade. Mas hoje nós temos problemas que têm uma complexidade enorme. Já não é uma questão só de ter muitas variáveis, como aquilo que eu chamei a ciência da multiplicidade. É uma questão de ter muitas variáveis, ter um número enorme de variáveis, e nós acreditarmos que há alguma relação constante entre essas variáveis. Há algum padrão que nós temos que apanhar. Mas para isso temos que jogar com essa infinita variedade de dados. Portanto, nova metafísica, isto levava a muitos desenvolvimentos que também não tenho tempo, novos problemas, que são os tais que eu assinalei aqui desta maneira, problemas globais, problemas económicos, de racismo, de clima. Por exemplo, o clima. Não havia, no século XVIII, nenhuma ciência que estudasse o clima. Porquê? Porque não havia possibilidade, dentro do regime cartesiano, de estudar o clima. O clima não é uma soma de pequenas partes. O clima é uma articulação dinâmica de um conjunto enorme de fatores e, portanto, não pode ser estudado senão interdisciplinarmente. Pronto, portanto, novos problemas, problemas urgentes, problemas que a sociedade quer que sejam resolvidos, que nós todos queremos que sejam resolvidos, a nossa vida está em risco, muitas vezes, em função destes problemas, e problemas que não podem ser resolvidos por uma só disciplina. E, evidentemente, isto reclama uma nova heurística, e é aqui que a interdisciplinaridade entra. Como uma nova heurística, ou seja, como um novo procedimento de construção de conhecimento novo. Heurística significa isso. Significa a procura das formas de conhecer aquilo que não conhecemos ainda. E, portanto, a interdisciplinaridade, para mim, tem a ver, sobretudo, com esta questão de uma nova heurística correspondente a um novo tipo de problemas e a uma nova metafísica. É evidente que isto exige novos instrumentos e o computador é um instrumento absolutamente fundamental para a ciência que nós fazemos. Exige novas metodologias, a questão dos big data, a questão dos mapping, a questão da visualização da informação, que é tanta que tem que ser visualizada para poder ser minimamente apreendida, a questão de novas formas de pensamento, que tem a ver com a dimensão cartográfica e diagramática do raciocínio, novas formas de colaboração, que tem a ver com, se quiserem, com aquilo que a gente chama o networking science, a ciência que se constitui pelos cruzamentos, uma sensibilidade relativamente à dimensão política e social da ciência, uma curiosidade e um respeito pelas outras disciplinas, uma modéstia e uma capacidade de descentramento, de sair da sua própria competência, de abandonar aquilo que já se sabe para ir à procura daquilo que o outro sabe e que pode ser útil para aquilo que eu estou a fazer, e uma capacidade de ultrapassar as oposições tradicionais que o livro do Snow tão bem caracterizou entre ciências explicativas, como são as naturais, e ciências compreensivas, como são as ciências humanas e sociais, ciências hard e ciências soft. Eu não gosto desta designação, é uma designação imperialista. Não tem nenhum sentido. Temos ciências explicativas e compreensivas, ciências naturais e ciências sociais, ciências e humanidades, ciências e artes. Todas estas oposições que construíram o nosso universo de quadriculados estanques, temos que ter a capacidade de as ultrapassar. Aliás, podemos não ter, se não tivermos, vamos sendo eliminados pelo sistema, porque não é uma questão de querermos ou não querermos, é o que está a acontecer, quer nós queiramos, quer não. É isso que está na ordem do dia, é essa capacidade. Quem não quiser fica para trás. Depois das duas culturas do Snow, ainda há o livro do biólogo da vossa disciplina, que é o Wilson, a Conciliance, e cá está ele a reclamar, esta imagem é dele, a reclamar a ligação entre as várias ciências. As ciências sociais, as humanidades, as artes. É esta abertura que é necessário ter, porque ela é que corresponde àquilo que está a acontecer no conhecimento humano, nas estruturas institucionais e no nosso tempo, na nossa civilização. A última questão seria perguntar porque é que isto é tão difícil de fazer. Quer dizer, se é verdade que a interdisciplinaridade corresponde à nossa civilização, à transformação que a nossa civilização e a nossa cultura está a ter. Se é verdade que a interdisciplinaridade corresponde à nova estrutura de organização das disciplinas que nós constatamos. Se é verdade que a interdisciplinaridade corresponde a uma nova heurística que é necessária para uma ciência da complexidade que é a nossa, que vai à complexidade, como é o caso da ecologia, então, por que é que isso é tão difícil de fazer? E, é claro, temos que perceber, eu não quero responder a esta pergunta, talvez ela possa ficar em aberto para a discussão, mas só dar uma pista, que é o seguinte. Temos que perceber que as instituições foram criadas na estrutura anterior. E as instituições, por isso, são lentas, transformam-se muito mais lentamente do que o conhecimento. É como se nós tivéssemos uma bela ideia no interior de uma casa, eu estou a sonhar com não sei o quê, mas eu estou agarrada à minha casa, onde eu não posso fazer isso ainda. Não é? E, portanto, há um atraso, claro, típico das instituições face ao desenvolvimento. Por exemplo, a constituição deste colégio é um passo em frente, porque este colégio é, obviamente, uma estrutura interdisciplinar, nem podia deixar de ser. E mais, é uma estrutura que não se enquadra na estrutura clássica das universidades. A nossa universidade resolveu abrir-se para um novo tipo de estruturas e criar estes colégios que têm por vocação justamente ser interdisciplinares. Nem podia ser de outra maneira. Mas isto corresponde a um estado do momento, não é? E, portanto, digamos que o vosso colégio está perfeitamente nesta linha. Já agora aproveito para dizer, eu propus um colégio sobre interdisciplinaridade, só que não foi aceito. Era demasiado ousado para que a nossa universidade fosse capaz de o reconhecer como válido. Disseram-me que não, muito obrigada, mas não. Eu perguntei porquê, não me responderam. A verdade é esta. Eu estou convencida que acho lindamente que este colégio tenha sido constituído, que outros colégios tenham sido constituídos, porque eles correspondem exatamente ao movimento que a ciência está a passar. Por exemplo, este colégio, Food, Farming and Forestry, não corresponde a uma licenciatura. Que eu saiba, informei-me na internet e percebi que havia pelo menos 10 ou 12. Não é verdade? 10 ou 12 licenciaturas. Foi preciso articular, compreendem? Foi como exatamente no Kandinsky. Foi preciso ir buscar coisas diferentes e misturar. E fazer um patchwork para que este colégio fosse possível para tratar de um problema novo. A florestação nunca foi problema da biologia. O problema da biologia era a classificação da árvore. Dos vários tipos de árvores. Abstratas. Nós agora temos um caso concreto, temos um problema concreto. E para isso temos que articular e colaborar entre várias áreas. Por isso é que eu propus o tal colégio sobre interdisciplinaridade. Mas esse ainda ia muito à frente e não podia, por isso, ser aceito pela nossa universidade, que, como todas as universidades, tem o seu peso e a sua lentidão. Já deu um passo em frente, mas não foi capaz de dar dois. Foi essa a minha opinião. É essa a minha opinião. Eu fico por aqui. E o nosso colégio, o colégio que eu propus, chamava-se exatamente Filosofia da Ciência e Interdisciplinaridade. Ou seja, correspondia a este apelo que os colegas estão a fazer hoje aqui. e que me fizeram a mim e que eu muito agradeço. Muito obrigada. Fico aqui. Cá está, olha, até tinha posto aqui, o objetivo do nosso colégio era oferecer à Universidade de Lisboa uma estrutura transversal de análise epistemológica e reflexão sobre o sentido e os modos de trabalho cooperativo e a interação heurística entre todos os domínios do conhecimento. Não é? Era exatamente isso. Não, mas foi chumbado.
Ok. Ora, vou aqui. Okay. So we also know new facts about the history happening on ongoing history. So I think we have already many themes for discussion. My intervention wouldn't be necessary because I think there is a lot of wood to be burned into our discussion debate. I'll try to only in a brief moment to talk about interdisciplinary or research agendas which are interdisciplinary and which are within the scope of this college. And I'll try to talk not as someone who studies interdisciplinarity, but someone who understands that this is a relevant thing by experience, some that learned that this is important by experience. And I will also focus on two different interdisciplinary agendas, which are of the two types that were described both by our two previous speakers. The interdisciplinary that comes from a top-down agenda that was set by research policy, and another one that came from the epistemic movement of science itself, in which it was recognized that for some sciences, either you go interdisciplinary or you cannot go forward. So I think it's basically the two types which already were very well explained by the two previous speakers. And the first of these themes is about what we call now ecosystem services. Okay, ecosystem services are already, contaminated in brackets by this top-down policy agenda. They are a very, very structured area of collaboration between different disciplines, but they started to be, or I cannot go to the history of the concept because I don't have enough time, but these ideas started to be, a genuine effort coming from two very different disciplines, or more than two, but I will focus on two that are the ones I know better, which is economics. Economics is a very imperialist science that tries to apply to everything the same concepts it developed to study a specific subject. And you can see that very easily if you read the book by Becker, a Nobel Prize of Economics, about the economics of everything. Everything can be studied through the lenses of economics, such as crime, drug addiction, everything. So you can study it because in all of these cases you have the basic economic problem, which is to choose among different ways of using scarce resources which have alternative ways of utilization. So every problem that formally have this aspect can be studied using the economic methods. So economics is very imperialist. But economics in this sense was very closed because the things that were recognized to affect people's well-being were the food we eat, were the computers we use, were the traveling and tourist services we get from the economy. So economics was about people satisfying their own needs through the workings and the functioning of the economy. There were other things like air quality, nice landscapes, of course, that affect our physical and mental health, but they were discarded simply because they were thought they were not scarce by the first economists. So they were outside economics because they were not scarce. As they became scarce, and it was obvious that they couldn't be discarded because they affect human well-being and they were at the same time scarce, so economics could no more go ahead without recognizing that these things should be brought inside economics. So economics works in this sense. If there is something that you need, this thing needs to be taken inside. So it's imperialist in this sense. It is expanding her own boundaries. And this expansion of boundaries, in some moment, encounters other disciplines. And so this is made by this outside movement of economics by taking inside air quality, nice landscapes, and so on. And the fact is that ecosystems provide us with those insights, with those inputs, I'm sorry. At the same time, ecologists were acknowledging that ecosystems are no more natural. If you cannot understand human action upon ecosystems and their impacts, you don't understand ecosystems themselves. So they were in a convergent route, which put them in a constellation of routes which was possible to work together because they were recognizing that were some boundary areas which were of interest for both of them. Economics in a very expansionist way, ecology trying to study ecosystems and trying to focus only on the material effects of human actions on ecosystems and not necessarily on the human drivers and motivations that motivated those human actions. So these things were left outside. So ecology is not so imperialist. Ecologists don't want to explain human behavior and their actions, but only wants to understand the effect of human behavior on ecosystems. And this provided an arrangement for a possible marriage, because there is an area that economics wants and ecology doesn't want, and so there is a space for some mutual arrangement which could be accepted and agreed upon. And this marriage created something more or less like this, which is very interesting, because I think this, at the first time, was born from this direct trajectory of two sciences. Now it's much more than that. There are many funded research calls based on this, and there is much money going around, so that it's both things. It's both drivers for interdisciplinarity. And so what we have here is something which I cannot explain very in detail, but the idea is the following. We have the state of the ecosystem, which is the second thing, which is what the ecologists study. They study the structure and the functioning of ecosystems. Now there is the production of these ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are something that result directly from the working of the ecosystem. So the production of ecosystem services is something for the ecologists or for the hydrologists or people from the natural sciences, not for social scientists. But then there is the effect of those ecosystem services on human well-being. And this is a matter for social sciences, for economics, and for other social sciences, trying to see the impact of these ecosystem services on human well-being. And then there is the problem. Our societies are mostly market economies and mostly market societies, in which for things to make people move, for things that want to have an incentive on human behavior, they need to have a market price. And because of that, usually the effect on human well-being is measured in euro terms, in monetary terms, because we trade everything for money, and this is a very easily understandable way of expressing this impact on well-being. And because these things are measured in money, this created some contradiction with other visions of the way the impact of ecosystem services on human well-being should be accounted for. And so this created discussion, debate. And then created another thing, which is those who are on the top, who manage the ecosystems, who produce an impact on the ecosystem, they react to market stimuli. So there was also a need not only to measure the value, but also of capturing the value in a way that make people's behavior adjust in a way that is more interesting for ecosystem services and for human well-being. So this is a way of configuring the issue. And this way is very interesting because each of these arrows is the subject of a specific disciplinary area. So this is a way different disciplines were combined in a very structured and easily understandable arrangement, configuration, in which each arrow is the branch for each monkey. I would say each monkey in its branch. This is a Portuguese saying, I don't know if it's translatable to English, but each monkey in each branch is a way for the different monkeys to live together in peace and harmony without lots of violent things. So this is a way of structuring interdisciplinary, this is interdisciplinary collaboration in a peaceful way, provided we have a framework in which each discipline could act on each arrow and could pass to the other disciplines some kind of information that makes sense within the overall framework. So this is the way things have been structured. I make the point that this was originated by genuine trends in disciplines and then became institutionalized in this way. And now the calls are more or less like this structure, have this structure for frameworks. The second thing, this occurred from policy side. This is about sustainable intensification. This is a debate which is very interesting. We have one of our colleagues, of our college advisors, Professor Charles Godfrey, who was one of the creators of this broad idea. And this idea has an interesting thing because it's a very simple thing. It's a practical problem. And the practical problem is the following. We need to feed more people. So we need to have those food productions which are necessary to feed all people by the mid of this century. And then the problem is if we do it by expanding farmland, we'll have big problems of deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions, loss of biodiversity. We cannot increase the area under cultivation very much. So we needed to do it in the same land. Doing it in the same land is increase the output per hectare, increasing yields. And to increase yields, the only way we knew from the past was using more inputs, more fertilizers, more water, and so on. And this was not also a good idea because all these inputs have been also a problem in the past and the present, and will be in the future if we go in the same direction. So the solution was to keep the good side of intensification, which was producing more per hectare, and keeping also and also by not having the bad side, the moon side of the intensification, which was using more inputs, having more pollution, and so on. So the idea was having a more efficient use of inputs. And so this redesigned the calls for interdisciplinarity in this area. So having more output without more inputs. And this is very important because in the past, the intensification was what saved Amazonia and other natural systems. If we didn't produce the food we needed in the past by intensification, we would have no more Amazonia and other natural systems. So the idea was that there were two important research agendas. One was based on information technology, remote sensing, and so on, which would allow us to use the inputs in a more efficient way by using the inputs in a precise window, space and time window, in which they are used by plants and are not going to be spilled over to the environment. And the second way was redesigning ecosystems and putting the factory of nature working again without the need for more inputs. So and these two agendas, they are very precise with respect to the type of disciplines they require. And so this is rearranging completely the calls, the way we work, and this is completely top-down by a diagnostic of the problem made by top policymakers and top science policy makers. So this is completely different from the other because this has no origin on the story of different disciplines, but came from a really practical need that went into the policy system that created new possibilities for research in these areas, which are very much prioritized in nowadays. So it's to give an idea. This make the power and the resources given to different disciplines to change in a somehow abrupt way, which causes problems, which in this case is not the science itself that is creating a trend in which society is heavy and it's not responding like Olga was saying, but is the opposite. Society is asking very fast and the rearrangement of disciplines is not coming so fast. So in this case, society is going faster than science itself. And that's only my idea, to give you some two practical examples which are closer to our experience, and then probably we have good. So probably it's the time to have some input from the participants. And I would ask you, you can make it in English or in Portuguese, and then we will translate. And Anna, okay. So Anna can start, and we are still waiting for more. Luís, como é que circula? Como? Deve ser aqui. Como é que isto... Desculpem lá, mas aqui também é preciso alguma interdisciplinaridade, porque nós que trabalhamos com outras coisas não somos capazes de ligar os microfones. Como é que... Nós temos alguém que possa levar os microfones? Se calhar, quem é que leva o microfone? Pode fazer, por favor, é ali. A Sara já se tinha inscrito? Não, é que já tinha havido ali uma inscrição atrás. Não, mas faça favor, vá. Avançamos.
About this last part of Lima Santos and all the talks together. The problem now, and I'm asking if we are not assisting in society of a big gap between all that this new approach in science promised and the results and the capacity of the common science to understand this new model and this new approach. This is a question, and the question comes from recent results in society as a whole in different parts of the world.
Tem muito da questão da interdisciplinariedade, mas existe também outra palavra que é transdisciplinaridade, e eu muitas vezes percebi daquilo que estavam a falar eram mais coisas transdisciplinares do que interdisciplinares. E eu não sei se calhar é confusão minha, mas gostava de ouvir a vossa opinião sobre a diferença entre isto e... Porque eu tenho a ideia que a transdisciplinaridade, isso sim, é que leva a que tenham que ser definidos novos métodos e, por exemplo, para
My question has to do with something that is already over there on the board, the involvement of extra academic participants. The expositions here have been concentrating on interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity within academia. But I would say that it's also a very fruitful path to involve other actors, organizational, meaning government agencies, civil society, and how is that happening or not, and how does academia look at that possibility?
We can start trying to respond to the doubts of the participants and questions raised by participants. So I would probably now, we could make it in the inverse way. So.
Okay, thank you so much. The first question about the gap that exists today between science and society in some way. I quite agree. I would say that society is ahead, exactly as the science is also ahead. What is not ahead is institutions. But because, for instance, even if science wants to go to, and it wants. Scientists, they create new disciplines. They arrange their efforts. They collaborate in order to go to meet these social problems. But the structures, the infrastructures are not yet prepared, completely prepared. Sometimes they are, but I think that the difficulties are those. But I also believe that one of the qualities for the necessary requirements for doing interdisciplinary is to have the sensibility, what I call a sensibility to the social problems, to the problems that are new problems and need urgent solution. And that is very much in line with what the interdisciplinary does. The second question about the very concept of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, I do not believe that this would be a major issue. In my point of view, I have wrote that in my book, there are a continuum between what we call multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. In my point of view, these constitute a kind of a continuum. If you just put people together and they speak each one its own language, then we could say we have pluridisciplinarity. If they begin to collaborate, to cooperate, to meet an object, a common object, to share methodologies and so on, so we would have interdisciplinarity. If they are open to social requirements, if they are able to go far from their disciplines, if they are open, for instance, if they are in natural science, but they want to speak with humanities, for instance, with social sciences, with arts, then we have transdisciplinarity. In my point of view, it's just a question of level of integration. The third thing, this room is not very much interdisciplinary. That's why we are not all speaking. We are with some difficulty of speaking, and the first moments are always the more difficult. And if we are close to each other, if we have time and if we want, then we can begin speaking. But in such a room, so long, you see, it's so cold. It's not so easy. It's not so easy. That's why the infrastructures are necessary. If we were together taking a coffee, maybe we could speak better to each other. That's the problem of institutions. They create a space, they create a panorama, and we are inside, trying. And sometimes it doesn't help. You see? That's what happens with interdisciplinarity. The sciences are there, the people has goodwill, they want to collaborate, but they have their habits, they have their structures. They belong to this department and not to your department. And my department is different from yours. And I publish in this journal and not in yours. So maybe I can just listen something from you and come quickly to my own discipline. Because I make my career in my own discipline. And as Uskali said, I am going to be bibliometric evaluated in my discipline, not in yours. So how can we change? It is necessary to be a good person to do interdisciplinarity. I would say so. It is a virtue. It is necessary to have this large heart, this large open heart, to be able to say, no, I am curious. I want to know, how do you see the problem? Not just, give me your instrument, I apply to my own discipline and I forget about you. No, it's just something very... Okay, but we have yet these large rooms. Okay. But we have internet where we share a lot of things. This forum, we are in a moment of transition. Difficult one, I say.
I agree there is a transition going on, and I have certain fears about it too, because I don't see that it's so under full control by powers that would have a sufficient understanding of what's going on. So my fear, and this is why I keep sort of offering some warnings and identifying risks and so forth. My fear is about the future of science, whether science is under great change, and it will change ever more in the coming years and decades. And the fear is that science might not retain its epistemic capacities sufficiently. It will be put in the market, so to speak, and you never know how the market is going to behave, and whether the market is going to be doing good things to science. Anyway, a couple of comments about these various issues that have been floating around here. There is a lot of naivety, I would say, around the interdisciplinarity. There is this sort of innocent wish that let's just come together, let's just join forces, and let's address the big issues and problems in society so as to solve them, and so forth. But there are so many tensions and so many dilemmas here in this overall process that it's very, very important to be aware of them, identify them, analyze, diagnose them, and then deal with them wisely and effectively. Consider, for example, this notion of scientific quality. I mean, if you listen to the admin people and the science policy people, there's a tendency there to equate scientific quality and interdisciplinarity. Practical relevance, etc., is sort of included in the notion of scientific quality, and practical relevance cannot be had without interdisciplinarity and so forth. Now, this easily dismisses or ignores the notion of being disciplined. I mean, there is a certain, one should distinguish between being disciplinary and being disciplined. If you see the difference between these two, being disciplined means being, having a lot of integrity, being rigorous, not yielding to outside forces, and keeping good care of objectivity and these kinds of things. And of course, and the challenge here is to be disciplined without, being insulated in disciplines, scientific disciplines, and so forth. Anyway, so there is I think the big challenge ahead of us, and the one that we are already struggling with is this mismatch between various items. There's a mismatch within the academia between the cognitive side of disciplines and the institutional or organizational side of disciplines. And those are not fully in tune with one another right now. There are all sorts of cognitive processes, cognitive challenges, etc., that are not well served by the current disciplinary structure, institutional structure of universities. And so there is a need for readjusting and reforming, revising this institutional organizational structure. But then again, this can be done well, and it can be done badly. And if it's done badly, then the cognitive capacities of science will suffer. And here we have these top-down and bottom-up ways of doing it, and so forth. Probably the good strategy would be to combine the two, top-down and bottom-up. There's all too much top-down rearrangement of these organizational structures of universities, for instance, nowadays. There should be far more input from bottom up. And of course, the third component that needs to be adjusted with these other two, regarding which there is a mismatch, is these social and practical problems and needs out there. So this is the one way of mapping the situation, the landscape within which we are now acting and trying to find our ways. These three items: cognitive disciplines, institutional disciplines, and then the extra academic societal problems and needs out there. And here, of course, we are all aware of this, the lack of uniformity within the academia. Disciplines are different. Natural sciences seem to have a far more easy time in collaborating with one another, talking to one another, understanding one another, than social sciences. Amongst social sciences, even though they have fairly shared subject matter to study, they have developed so different frameworks, so different ways of studying society, different aspects of it, etc. And their internal cultures are so different that they have a difficulty with dealing with one another, more so than do natural sciences amongst themselves. And then, of course, in many instances, there's a need to combine natural sciences and social sciences with one another. And then natural scientists especially have a great difficulty in sort of picking and choosing those social sciences and scientists that they would like to work with. Who has the best, utmost scientific authority and competence on the social science side? Because it's such a variety, heterogeneous variety of disciplines, subdisciplines, and individuals and authorities and so forth. This is another big challenge and an issue that needs to be met. And then regarding the society out there, I mean, this has to do with this idea of extra academic transdisciplinarity. There are a number of different partners, possible partners that we could connect with out there. But this is it's also very, very important to see that likewise, as we have this lack of uniformity within the academia, we have a lack of uniformity out there in society. It's not uniform. There's all sorts of agents, all sorts of groups, all sorts of interests, all sorts of power resources that those outside agents have. And once you connect with them, you're also faced with that heterogeneity, that lack of uniformity. It's not just society out there. Society is, as social scientists at least know, it's a mix of all kinds of things, and it's not uniform regarding the interests and stakes and powers and so forth. So be aware of there are dangers lurking behind the corner. So be aware of that when you connect yourself with the rest of society. So I mean, all of these observations give rise to these various tensions, trade-offs, and dilemmas that need to be faced, and they should be faced and dealt with in a way that serves the best of science, the best interest of science itself as a cognitive activity. I think science, these challenges can be met in bad ways, such that science will suffer at the end. And if science will suffer, then society will suffer even more. So it's an advice to take good care of science. And in order to be able to take good care of science, you need to understand what science is and what it requires to do a good job.
Thank you. I will take this last point of the participation of outside in relation to science, outside agents in the process, and the problem is that which agents? I think there is a problem of integration, of degrees of integration in which we can see interdisciplinary as Professor Olga, and we can see transdisciplinary as the extreme, or even adisciplinarity as the extreme, which is, I think, utopic and completely out of sense, for me at least. But what I feel when we move to outside agents is to choose those that will participate. I had a master student that wanted to make a master thesis on participation by civil society, in brackets, in decision making related to the environment. Okay? And so the first learning she had was that those that participate in those fora are not exactly the housekeeper or the common people, are representatives of the common people, or are representative of certain specific groups of people, because ordinary people have no time for such participations, and have no, in a very economically saying, in a cost-benefit sense, doesn't make many sense to have to be hours in a meeting in which most of the issues are not close to their experience, and so I think there is a problem with outside agents. Is because scientists participate because they belong to a disciplined way of getting knowledge and they value by the method. And so it's very clear that the scientist has personal interests, of course. A scientist has a football club, has certain economic interests, have other things. But a scientist, it is distinguished because he follows a method, and these qualities is called to participate. The other people, we don't know very clearly why we are dealing with those people and not with others. I give only one example. When we talk about civil society now, with the calls of the H 2020, and we are mainly talking about corporations, about economic agents. And these economic agents have a specific rationality that want a specific type of research, which is not the overall scientific project of getting knowledge about the world. And even themselves, they use lots of knowledge that were produced independently by science. There are many books about the entrepreneurial state. It's a book we should read, because that most of the scientific results they are using in the internet, in other kinds of economic driven activities, are got from pure science and from things that were funded by government, not by... So because if the government didn't have a policy for science itself, these results would never been produced, because they are not compatible with the time frames of corporations and so on. So I think there is a problem with transdisciplinarity in this way, which is not the fact we want external agents with ourselves to define our research problems and even to co-produce science with us. That's not the problem. I think the problem is the ones we invite. And now I think it's, for instance, I work a lot with farmers' associations. And I think farmers' associations have a more clear vision of the common good than corporations. So why it is forbidden to work more systematically with associations? So I think there are many questions to put here. It's not only a matter of getting people from outside to participate. Who is going to participate? Why? And what is the specific rationality these people are going to introduce? Are these people are we inviting them to define the problems, or are we define them to produce knowledge? So all these questions, it's very important to put them again and again and to be very clear about it. Because if not, sometimes we would do better if we worked only as scientists. At least we knew what was our job about. In certain configurations of participation, we don't know exactly where is this going to lead us. And I think it's not only because of methodological and discipline problems, but discipline in the sense of scientific method, but also because of the interests we are serving. It's very important for the scientists to know exactly with whom is he collaborating and in which direction. And I think we as scientists are very responsible not to put these questions. I think this is a question for ourselves. We need to question ourselves about in which process are we going to be involved. It's our responsibility, the final outcome. It's not only the responsibility of firms with particular interests, and it's the interest. It's our own responsibility. And I think this is an attitude when we go working with outside people that we need to take. We need to change attitude. We need to change this attitude that we only produce knowledge. The way it is going to be used is with others. So if we're going to participate with others, no more like this. And so there are many other questions we need to put ethically even, no? And that's my main remark. We open more questions? Okay.
May I just have a brief follow-up on this? See, there are studies of, I mean, all of this is also connected to the issue of public trust in science. The general public, I mean, there are surveys in different countries asking how ordinary people feel about science, whether they trust science, they have a high appreciation for science, and so forth. And then we have international comparisons, and then we have comparisons across time. And what has happened in the US in the past few decades is a huge decline in the public trust in science, especially amongst the Republican Party supporters. I mean, those people used to have the highest trust in science still in the 1970s. Now they are very low. And the reason for this is that amongst those people, that part of the population, there is a recognition that science has sort of allied itself with the government. And because they hate the government, they also hate science. They don't trust science anymore. And of course, this will be bad for science because voters' support is needed for the governments to provide resources for science. Now, in Europe, the image is a bit different because here, the public trust and appreciation for science is a function partly of how close science is connected to the business world, as it were, whether it's perceived as serving the business interests out there in society. And if it does, if it's so perceived to function, then the trust in science is in decline. It's different in the US again. But so one needs to be very careful with these images, these sort of alliances and connections with the outside world in order to protect the image of science in the eyes of the general public, because the general public's opinions make a great deal of difference for the future resources that science will receive.
Thank you. Há uma intervenção aqui de trás, eu não... Sim. Tem, mas eu passo disto, Isabel. É só isso.
Pode-se resumir assim, está a funcionar? Na descrição que eu vi da professora Olga Pom, por exemplo, das várias disciplinas, está dominado por âmbitos que são um bocadinho relacionados aqui mais com exatamente as ciências clássicas, não é? Aquelas 3, depois aquelas 4. Há uma raiz que vem daí e que me parece que é influenciada por este ambiente que rodeia, no fundo, aquilo que é a filosofia das ciências, que normalmente está integrada mais, talvez, historicamente, mais ligada às ciências humanas e sociais. Eu não sei, eu não sou absolutamente, não domino esse assunto, eu sou engenheira agrónoma e, como engenheira, sinto que a engenharia é um exemplo paradigmático eu diria mesmo, de transdisciplinaridade, não é? E, portanto, senti um bocadinho uma ausência e gostaria de perceber como é que uma pessoa com este tipo de reflexão e formação coloca a engenharia, que é de facto o melhor exemplo dessa transdisciplinaridade e, especialmente, eu ousaria dizer, mas pronto, isto é defeito de formação, a engenharia agronómica, não é? Ponto 1. Ponto 2, quando nós sabemos que há 2000 anos que já havia tratados de agronomia, podemos dizer que eles se baseiam muito, claro, em ciência, em empirismo, não é? Mas será que esse empirismo não é importantíssimo hoje em dia, não faz parte não é um ingrediente para o conhecimento? Há aspectos metodológicos aqui. Como é que se reflete sobre isto? quando se diz que a transdisciplinaridade surgiu este século XX, não é? Pronto, como é que se pode responder a esta questão?
Há mais...
Thank you very much for all the presentations. I wanted to ask, in line with José, what you've said earlier, I wanted for you to explore a little bit the idea, because you're talking about when we involve others outside to come in or to be integrated on what we're doing. I think I'm missing a little bit, because I come from a more artistic background, the aspect of experimentation and the aspect that we've seen in your slides of the emergence, or the role of autopoiesis, of that aspect of how organisms function, and sometimes also about experimenting and that curiosity of seeing what if we involve or it happen, unraveling or uncover. Maybe that has some potential in the work. So it is important. I want you just to comment, or because there's the ethical and the political issue of who are we inviting, but also maybe something can happen. I wanted just to relate with that aspect of emergence and
Não era para intervir, mas esta intervenção aqui da colega sobre a questão da engenharia e quando falou do aspecto da interdisciplinaridade, de facto eu penso que não é nova a interdisciplinaridade, porque ela sempre existiu, e dou como exemplo algo que merece a pena ser aqui referido, é que as civilizações ancestrais, nomeadamente as civilizações ameríndias e outras, já cultivavam o aspecto interdisciplinar. Basta ver que nessas civilizações o que era a cosmovisão não era mais do que uma interdisciplinaridade de todas as ciências, onde incluía, claro, tudo o que era o mundo. A visão que eles tinham era muito mais interdisciplinar do que aquela onde depois apareceram os colonizadores, que então tinham uma visão já completamente diferente, e não sou especialista nessa questão das civilizações, mas o que eu penso, houve um corte radical, com custos muito elevados para esses povos, como sabemos, foram destruídas muito, mas não deixou de que esses conhecimentos continuassem, e o que vemos agora é que nessas civilizações, cada vez mais vai beber a essas civilizações esse aspecto interdisciplinar, que é a cosmovisão, e outros, não falo das civilizações chinesas e por outro, que tinham uma outra visão, e eu acho que esse aspecto há que referir aqui.
Okay, I will. Okay, I think we can deal with this.
Okay, okay. So many things. The position of engineering. I've noticed in one of the new kind of disciplines is precisely the connection between engineering and classical disciplines. For instance, genetical engineering. It's you have engineer and genetics. And usually there was a rupture, there was a rupture between the theoretical sciences and the practical or more practical sciences like engineering. But today we assist to merging. In the case of genetic engineering is completely a good example of merging classical disciplines with engineering. But you mentioned that engineering is an example of interdisciplinarity, and I quite agree. And this is because you enter, you have for being in engineering, you have mathematics. mathematics, you have physics, you have a lot of other disciplines that come together for the solution. Sorry? Yes, economics, everything. So you have a lot of disciplines, classical disciplines, who come together for the solving of one problem. What I would say is that engineering is a kind of an ancestor, a much old form of dealing with problems, as problem solving, as today we have, when we have, for instance, this college or forest food and farming. So you have here an arrangement for the solution of a problem. And engineering, in some sense, as far as I know, it is an old activity which puts together several disciplines in order to solve a problem. But the classical style of science is pure science, theoretical science is not that one. It was precisely the contrary. It was to go away from the practical problems and arrive to theoretical problems, mathematical problems, and solve the problems, and be far from the concrete problems. And now we are coming again to the new problems. I don't agree that you can speak about interdisciplinarity in what concerns the traditional societies as Amerindians or whatever you mentioned, because there we are before the constitutions of science. We have a kind of a syncretic thinking. It's not the same as having passed through the disciplines and then coming again. There is some similarities, of course, because we go again to the concrete. We go again to the problem. This problem, for instance, food. A tribe in Amazonia, they have the problem of food. And they participate all together to solve this problem, of course. But that has nothing to do with science. The science began when we escaped the practical problems and come to know what is digestion, what is a food, what is an element, what is a nutrient. And we are not speaking about this guy who has no food. But now we want to speak about this guy who has no food. So we have to go again to these concrete problems. That's why there are so much similarities. So, but I wouldn't like to say that interdisciplinarity is quite a novelty. It has something that has always existed, mostly in the fantastic cases of new discoveries. For instance, a guy like Poincaré, he was a mathematician, he was a physician, he was a guy interested in philosophy. So you see, so in this kind of creatures that were able to produce great novelties, they had already some interdisciplinary awareness. But the most of the people in until the first part until this 20th century, they were specialists. The big names, usually they had an interdisciplinary background. They had, for instance, studied music or whatever, and these other areas were very important for the discovery of this or that. But usually the normal science was made by specialists. They know everything about very few things. But the guy who is able to give a step further, for instance, to create a new theory or a new law or whatever, then if you go and you see, then you have Bolzano or whatever, and you see this guy has an interdisciplinary background. He has studied the humanities, he has studied philosophy, he has studied, he's a mathematician, but he has studied biology, for instance. He came from, I've been reading the biography of Haeckel, because he has created the name of ecology. To come here, I was looking around ecology, and I came to Haeckel. It's quite a fascinating personage. He was a completely interdisciplinary personage. He was a biologist, he was a geographist, he was a physicist. He had a background in a lot of areas. That's why he was so important. He was able to create so important things.
The first guy to make a vision of was Alexander von Humboldt, that was not a specialist, was a man with a different vision, but was not specialist.
Yeah, and Eckel, neither Eckel. So the big names, I think the big names, they were always people with a background, with an interdisciplinary background. But that was not the usual practice of normal science. And today it is. Today everybody is compelled, is committed to collaborate with his colleagues, even if it is just an instrumental interdisciplinarity. Let me explain me how do you do for me to do better in my own discipline, even if it is only that. That is already something. Something I would like to say is that, on my point of view, interdisciplinarity has nothing to do with the end of the disciplines. On the contrary, interdiscipline exists because disciplines exist. So I am not against rigor, the rigor of disciplines. That is completely out of my mind. What I say is that after having done this huge, rigorous work inside your discipline, you have to open. You have to look to your surrounding, not only to the other disciplines, but to the society. That's why, for instance, open society is just an important movement today. Now, to look, I have a student doing a PhD on open society. What is that? What is that? It's a new concept, but it is probably a trend, an important trend. It's connected with what you said about the need to solve problems. And then engineering may be very, very fruitful because you have the experience of doing that. We have the people from pure science have to learn with you. How do you manage to put together a mathematician and a physician? And Wiener was an engineer. He was a biologist, he was an engineer, he came with computer guys, he came with mathematicians, and he put them together. Yeah, yeah. 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 But it exists to solve problems, no? But it exists to solve problems. Right. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. responses to a couple of questions that have been raised, engineering and interdisciplinarity first. Again, I would stress the importance of recognizing the lack of uniformity here. All engineering disciplines are not alike. There are a lot of differences between them. Some of them are more, others less interdisciplinary, as it were. And here we can distinguish between being intrinsically interdisciplinary, whether these engineering disciplines sort of incorporate contributions from a variety of disciplines, and then whether they are extrinsically interdisciplinary, whether they contribute to other interdisciplinary projects and so forth. For instance, in synthetic biology, I mean, there's a heavy engineering component. So engineering contributes to a big new field within biology and so forth. Regarding this intrinsic interdisciplinarity, this makes me recall one study that was done in the US amongst various universities. It was a survey asking people whether interdisciplinarity gives us better science or not. And so different disciplinarians were asked this question, and actually most respondents said yes, it does. Interdisciplinary science is better than plain disciplinary science, with only two exceptions. I wonder if you can think of what those exceptions were. One was economics. No interdisciplinarity, please. We do we do a better job by our own devices and so forth. We don't need others. And the other one was mechanical engineering. And of course, this can be explained by the fact that it's not very interdisciplinary intrinsically. So they again can get the job done without help from others. Okay, so regarding the so-called transdisciplinary dimension, of course, there is this one that comes with the idea of engineering disciplines being application-oriented and things like that. And of course, here it might be good to keep in mind that engineering, I mean, this very feature of engineering disciplines being applied-oriented or application-oriented, and therefore, more open to these connections and alliances with extra academic actors. This is a model that is actually now offered to many, if not all, other disciplines. Please be just like engineering is. This is the way of connecting, be application-oriented, be open for collaborations with extra academic agents and so forth. So I think engineering is an important family of disciplines to understand well in order to understand what's going on elsewhere in the academia at the moment for that particular reason. Now, the question about these lay knowledges, local knowledges, indigenous knowledges, and so forth, whatever there is, it existed before there was science, for sure, and it exists now that we have a lot of science. And of course, it's in the nature of science that there is a clash between what science says the world is like and between what the common sense or these lay or indigenous understandings say what the world is like. And so it's a huge challenge to try to combine these contradictory images of reality here. But of course, it must be done because much of the time those lay people, lay communities, etc., indigenous communities, have the sorts of practical wisdom that needs to be connected with scientific understanding in order to get many of our problems solved, from climate change and so forth, especially environmental problems, of course. But when you try to create closer connections, closer alliances and collaborations between scientists and these indigenous communities, difficulties arise. And this is, by the way, something that we have already studied a little bit in our center in Helsinki, that that, for instance, the very standards, the culture of inquiry or the culture of developing knowledge of reality might differ drastically and might be in contradiction with one another in these two. In science, on one hand, indigenous communities on the other. There is this notion in some indigenous communities that elders of those communities have the utmost authority. Their conceptions are not to be disputed or questioned. Okay, now it's very difficult for, in science we are supposed not to have such hierarchical or authoritarian structures. Of course there is a scientific authority, but it can always be questioned. The authority can always be wrong, but in these indigenous communities, the elder cannot be wrong, and therefore everything else must be, respectful for that, for the elders' opinions. And of course, then the scientists come in and start, being open about just anything and critical about just anything, and then problems arise, and the indigenous community might walk away, and this is the end of the collaboration. Things like that.
Okay, I'll probably we are a bit. I don't know from Louise and Wanda. We are almost, but I would only take advantage of these questions about local knowledge and lay person knowledge and the relations with science. I think we need to. Of course, I agree that the process through which we get knowledge is different between science. This is what distinguishes sciences, is the way we get, and is a more, not democratic, but cognocratic way of organizing ourselves. What is worth is not power, pure power, but is knowledge. And so these are two very important values of science, is the method and the non-authoritarian way of organizing people to get knowledge. There is one problem with science, which we don't know everything everywhere. We know about abstract things. We know about the H2O. We don't know about the glass of water in my bedroom. We know about lots of things in abstract terms. But lay people know much more than ourselves about their own circumstances, because all their knowledge has two functions. One is to work within that context, to work, not to die, for instance. And the other, which is very important, is making sense of what they live. So making sense and functional functions of knowledge, of lay knowledge, are very important for people. We as scientists also have lay knowledge in our daily lives. We are not only scientists. So we can know by introspection that we also have this kind of knowledge. And this, I think, is, I can talk you only two stories about this, which I think are very revealing. First, when I finished my degree in agronomy, I went to a community in the north of the country, which lived in a communitary way of living, very traditional, with common goods, common rules. 80% of the land was not private property, and so on. So this was the ideal for a young agronomist to know about the really sustainable society, really solidarity society. And I came with a very different view of that. So first thing is that was not the ideal I thought about. Even people there said, okay, in the past we were all of those things, but everything was worse. Except one thing, we were younger. That was the only advantage for people of this idealized past I have done. On the other hand, I acknowledge that they have lots of knowledge about the environment in which they work. Lots of knowledge, lots of knowledge that I didn't got in the university. So I learned a lot with them in terms of adjusted to context knowledge. And we can have this example of the two main agricultural systems in Portugal, in the north of the country, were almost imported from Latin America. We imported the association of beans with maize to the valleys, and the systems about the potato mixed with other crops to the mountains. So we imported entirely two production systems. So these production systems, by chance, worked also here in certain circumstances. So I think this is important. The lay person knowledge knows more about their system than ourselves. So I think there is a bridge, a possible bridge here, because we know more in abstract terms. We have a method which is better, but we need to dialogue with the knowledge of the system, of the local system, which is very important. I think there is one author in Portugal who works in the sociology of power and things like this, Boaventura Sousa Santos. He talks about two things. Science in the beginning had to do the first rupture with common sense, because if not, there would be no science. You know, the difficulties of Galileo with the visions of the Earth going around the sun. We have to have a rupture with all these things. And these things were very powerful. Now we don't see them as such, but they were very powerful at the time. And Boaventura Sousa, then we acquired a new mode of acquiring knowledge. We get much, and then Boaventura Sousa Santos talks about the second rupture. The second rupture is the encounter with common sense, with local. I think common sense is a very bad word, because there is no common sense. There are many local knowledges. Common sense is for sciences throwing into the bin every forms of knowledge which are not science. All are common sense, okay? But there are many forms of common which are explained by their local contexts. And Boaventura says that now the time, and this is very in line with what we discussed about this transdisciplinarity, is to bring this knowledge and to reinterpret them with what we now know and with the methods we now have to, because our methods can make these kinds of knowledge much more generalizable and much more abstract and much more valid universally. That's the role of science. And I think there is a big role for this dialogue, which needs to be done with very good methods. You know, it's nothing very easy, but I think it's a frontier we need to push ahead, because there is lots of knowledge there. And I see that not only with farming, but second, so I have two sons. One is becoming an architect, and the other is a violinist. My sons don't want to have nothing to do with science. They got into completely different directions. And I learn a lot with them about ways of getting knowledge, which of course, this idea that previous big scientists had some contacts with arts and with other forms of humanities, which were very important. And I would say that Luis, with the Humboldt example, I read this book, The Invention of Nature, this Christmas. I bought it for my wife, but I read it first. And then it's very important that Humboldt was a very close friend of Goethe and of Romanticists, and this was a part of the explanation for his big discoveries, because he allied the way of thinking of science with the Romanticists that experienced nature directly. So this idea that nature can be experienced directly, and at the same time scientifically, and to get some common grounds between these, was very fruitful in Humboldt's work. And Humboldt was the intellectual father of Haeckel. That's one of the reasons Haeckel is so interdisciplinary. So I think this point of getting in touch with local knowledge, with other forms of knowledge, and transdisciplinarity in a serious way, I think it's a very, very interesting, but I think there are also dangers in that. And I think that we need to do it methodically, not without any rules. Okay, there need to be rules for this approach, not to lose what we have of specific in science, the method and the values of science. And so I think we are more or less, I don't know if you want to say some more final words. Okay, so thank you very much for your participation. At the end, lots of people have talked, and thank you very much again for you both to have these properties of good people that are patient, to have some pleasure in involving with other people, which are obviously important attitudes for those who practice and who study interdisciplinarity. Thank you very much for all.